where I'm at in this current rabbit hole experience is the scam of inflation. The idea that governments have somehow convinced the population that money has to steal from you in order to work. So the question that I have for you, Dylan LeClair, is inflation necessary for an economy to work?
No, I don't think so. It's just that we've witnessed the greatest technological boom in human existence and human history during a mostly Keynesian economic paradigm. Because of banker interest, because of human incentives, because of the limitations of gold to scale as a media of exchange. But in theory, and I believe in practice at an individual level, and eventually somewhat of an aggregate level on a global scale, we're going to see the reality where if you are willingly or voluntarily operating on a separate system, you can opt out of the kind of political pillaging that the monetary system kind of forces upon you. So there's still, I mean, we're 50 years into this period where the government said, all right, we're not even going to pretend that we care about this gold peg or tether anymore, and we're just going to be paper currencies. And we're about a few years, I think about 3 years into the period where the inflation is unchecked, or not unchecked, but it was checked down, it was held down, and that was propped up by the industrialization of the world and globalization. And now we've kind of reached our growth limits. Not to sound like what is it, Malthusian, but we're at a point now where the debt and the financialization probably reached a peak in purchasing power terms in 2021. And the war and a bunch of these other things kind of sparked somewhat of a deflation into those things, of that paper wealth, and into the commodities and hard money sector. But I think the story of the next decade, the story of our lifetimes, is going to be the perpetual debasement of your purchasing power, in any currency terms, with the dollar probably being the best until potentially trust is lost in the dollar. So a long answer there, but I don't think it's ultimately necessary. It's just that most everybody on the planet hasn't ever operated under a framework where it wasn't the baseline.
Yeah. So you said something really interesting there, and I want to focus on, because usually, I'll put it this way, Dylan, we're definitely in the somewhat younger generation of Bitcoiners, right? You're a bit younger than me, and I'm pretty young in the grand scheme of things as well. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because the statement that you just made holds a lot more weight for us, because we don't have an alternative. Like Bitcoin for us is the way out. If you're a little bit older, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but you know, I guess you could make the argument it doesn't affect you as much. So I guess my question to you, Dylan, is where does Bitcoin play? Like, what's Bitcoin's role for our generation? I'm on the younger side of the millennial generation. You're Gen Z. So where does Bitcoin play into this?
Yeah, I mean, it plays a big role, and I think in terms of wealth, right? Like Gen Z is irrelevant. Millennials are as irrelevant as any generation in history in terms of like wealth purchasing power. Now that transfer is happening, mostly through inheritance from boomers, or going to be from boomers to the millennial generation, and some to Gen X as well. But I think it's more of an ability to not be stuck in the old world, right? Like I approach Bitcoin at the same time as I'm approaching Keynesian economic theory, and like it was just obvious from a fundamental level, like what was not more fair or equitable, but what I would prefer, right? Like what I want to do with my purchasing power. And that was a very obvious choice over the long term. But if you've been grounded in some framework or line of thinking, whether it's at a business level or a social level, or even a political level, right? Like it's just ingrained into people's heads, and anything that operates outside of that box doesn't make sense, is illogical, is a scam, is a fraud, whatever the things they say about Bitcoin. But here it is. It's still hasn't died. Blocks are coming in. Hash rates at all time highs. Right, like the market's saying something.
Absolutely. Do you do you worry a bit? Do you worry about, and the reason I'm saying this is what I've tended to notice, the pattern that I've tended to notice, and I kind of want to loop back into this concept of our generations. And the reason I'm bringing that up is, you mentioned it earlier, Dylan. If you're under the age of 35, you don't own anything. So does it worry you a bit that what I've tended to notice is that specifically the younger you are, the complete lack of interest in something like Bitcoin. People seem to continue to seek political solutions, and what I've also tended to notice also is that they blame capitalism for a lot of the woes of central planning, really, of
Yeah.
fiat money. So, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's dead on. It's dead accurate. There is a certain political nihilism to my generation. I've seen it with yours as well. Kind of a left leaning, or at the very least, a polarization. But at the at my age, Gen Z, like there is a very much ideological cult of social pressure to like conform to this certain fundamental reality that just somehow came out of nowhere, right? Which is 2 + 2 equals 5. And we can blame all these things on capitalism when capitalism is the greatest wealth and wealth producer, but not wealth producer like or wealth creation, but standard of living increase, like because of the capitalist innovations and ingenuity. So that's it's illogical, right? But I think ultimately, economic reality and Darwinism, as harsh as that sounds, is always going to impose itself. And things like these political ideas work in theory and not in practice, right? America has open capital markets, we're the global reserve currency, and when with that reality, without being able to close your capital account like China would, uh, money's going to flow to where it's treated best. So any of these MMT, Fantasyland things, CBO budget just came out today, said 2032 comes and debt to GDP's right where it's at, right? We're just to fund all this entitlements, to fund all of this spending over the next decade, the green revolution, whatever it may be, right? Maybe cancel some student debt, etc. It's all going to be basically monetized via the Fed or another government entity's balance sheet. There are no structural buyers of the debt, and so your purchasing power erodes away with as fast as the spigot does, or the money printer. So I think that's the bull case for Bitcoin. Is just like it's just math, and when you say that, it sounds like super bold to someone that hasn't done the homework or kind of worked through the game theory. But like, what's the ultimate reality of this debt situation that we're in an experiment of, right? We're 50 years in. So where do we go? And I think that my answer is obviously it's debasement. So where do you want to put your money?